Good evening and welcome to Primetime Lawmakers for March 30th, 2011, the 36th legislative day of the 2011 session of the Georgia General Assembly. I'm Scott Slade. Coming up at tonight's program, the Senate passes the state's $18 billion FY 2012 budget. The final document will be hammered out in a House Senate Conference Committee. A controversial bill to allow public-private water partnerships clears the House. A motion to reconsider the bill tomorrow was immediately made by opposition. We continue our leadership interview series. Tonight, I talked to Attorney General Sam Olens about everything from open meetings to human trafficking. And deer baiting has been stirring up debate at the Capitol lately. I'll be joined on set by a co-sponsor of a bill to allow hunters to bait deer, Representative Al Williams, and by Department of Natural Resources Deputy Commissioner Todd Holbrook. All that's coming up on Primetime Lawmakers this evening. But first, the Senate gives the 2012 budget its stamp of approval. Imwandi Lawson joins us live for the Capitol with more about Senate passage of HB 78. Good evening, Imwandi.
Good evening, Scott. There were only 4 dissenting votes today, and the Senate moved that spending plan for fiscal year 2012 closer to final passage. Senate Appropriations Chairman Jack Hill noted that the $18.2 billion spending plan invests in customer service improvements to the tune of $2.2 million, including money for driver services, the Department of Labor, and the Secretary of State's office, plus $1.2 million to reduce wait times at the Department of Revenue. Next year's budget also includes $60 million for the Department of Behavioral Health. That's to meet the terms of a Department of Justice settlement, $5 million to help close economic development deals, and $3.9 million for the cost of a special session for redistricting. Senator Hill said the challenges of funding health insurance for state employees would impact the state's ability to fund Medicaid.
State employees and teachers' payment for health insurance is based on a percentage of their income. That is not true of support employees. They are pretty much lower paid employees, and a contract, a set amount was worked out a number of years ago for their insurance. As the years have gone by and the cost of insurance has gone up, that price that systems pay has not gone up. So the cost to remain low for the systems for those employees while the cost of health care went right on up. Now, the employee was paying full price. Your school bus drivers and lunchroom workers are paying full price just like everybody else. Nobody's, on the employee side, nobody's getting a break. But the systems, school systems have been paying a discounted price for full coverage of health insurance. To try to partially meet that hole, we've basically used the Medicaid fund to help balance, to help fill that hole, both the House version and the Senate version. I wouldn't stand here and tell you that's the best plan, and I hope in conference we can discuss what's the best thing to do, and hopefully the governor will be at the table, and hopefully together we can figure out what is the best way to fund this, and also to be sure that we don't underfund Medicaid going into the future.
Democratic Whip Steve Henson argued that cuts to K-12 education, higher education, and the Hope Scholarship combined into a recipe for disaster.
In this budget, while the Senate added $1.5 million or so back to the budget, when you take out the state money and the stimulus money and the non-funding of growth, we have over $345 million cut from the Board of Regents budget. This is going to continue to force tuition higher and higher.
Henson was one of 4 senators, including 1 Republican, who voted against HB 78. The measure was immediately transmitted to the House, which disagreed with the Senate changes and paved the way for that matter to be worked out in conference committee. It should be noted that the House stayed in session tonight until about 6:20, as both the House and Senate were working behind the scenes to come to an agreement about the tax code overhaul that was passed yesterday by the Special Joint Committee on Georgia Revenue Structure. House Democrats and the Georgia Baptist Convention raised red flags today over HB 387's elimination of personal income tax exemptions. Democratic leaders say that move is going to hurt middle-class families, while the Baptist leaders fear that without an exemption for charitable giving, church revenues may decrease. House Speaker David Ralston told the House this evening that legislators would be here on Saturday if necessary to work out the differences. In other news, the House this afternoon approved a measure allowing local governments to form public-private partnerships to fund water projects. Now, before the vote on SB 122, I asked the bill sponsor, Senate Natural Resources and Environment Chair Senator Ross Tollison, about opponents' claims that that bill increases property seizures through eminent domain and circumvents the interbasin water transfer laws.
It is a public-private partnership where, let's say you build a water treatment facility, and let's say the government didn't feel like they could go float a bond, they want to hold their debt down, they didn't feel like they wanted to go out and float a bond to build that, they could bring in a private partner to help build that and fund it, and it's paid back out of the revenues from that. But the local government is in control of that contract. They decide in the beginning, they draft the contract, they set up the pricing, they do it all. And it's not out of control of the local government. So, but it just gives them another tool that they can use instead of going out and floating bonds.
Based on an article in today's Dahlonega Nugget, opponents of SB 122 from both parties charge the measure is a backdoor method for skirting the state's interbasin water transfer laws.
The people of Dawson and Lumpkin counties would get a reservoir put there, and that reservoir's water would be used in that area. And when the discharge comes out, the wastewater, the sewage, that will be treated and pumped into Forsyth County. It's that simple. It's that simple. This bill will authorize that wastewater to be used to fix Forsyth County's proposed water problem.
What this is about is taking wastewater from one county outside of the district, pumping it into the metro district, cleaning it up, using it in Forsyth County, and getting around the interbasin transfer laws.
But House Natural Resources and Environment Chair Lynn Smith says state law already protects against eminent domain and water transfer abuses.
So if someone wants to do a discharge or withdrawal, guess what? They run into the EPD, they run into the EPA, they run into the Corps of Engineers, and that's why these projects take 10, 15, 20 years, because it slows it down and it makes sure that we are following what the laws are.
SB 122 did clear the House by a vote of 92 to 68. Changes made in House committee would send that measure back to the Senate, but Senator Ross Tollison says he does approve those changes. It should be noted that opponents of that measure do plan to ask the House to reconsider its decision tomorrow. There was some contentious debate in the House today on a measure creating a special advisory commission on mandated health insurance. Senate Bill 17 cleared the House by a vote of 96 to 67, but not before the bill's sponsors were challenged about the need for such a measure.
100% better than the mechanism that we have now in evaluating this, because you will have legislators on this, you'll have business people on this, you'll have physicians on this to take a look, and they're doing it just like the tax council did at their own expense.
But Democratic Whip Carolyn Hughley argued that allowing the governor to make most of the appointments to the commission would strip the legislature of its power.
We need to take a look at the fact as to whether or not we're going to continue to give away our legislative authority to some outside commission. That's what we did with the tax council. We gave away our legislative authority and we waited for someone outside of the legislative body to come back and tell us what we should do.
Health and Human Services Chair Sharon Cooper successfully amended the bill to require that an obstetrician and pediatrician serve on the commission as a protection for the medical rights of women and children, which she said insurers have not always respected.
They will pay for prostate cancer for gentlemen, but at one point they didn't want to pay when a woman has breast cancer for the stripping of her breast and all the lymph nodes in her arm. They were putting women out who had had babies within 23 hours of delivery. Have any of you had wives that suffered under that?
Again, SB 17 passed by a vote of 96 to 67. In other news, the Senate Judiciary Committee this afternoon approved HB 87, the sweeping immigration reform bill that's been compared to Arizona's immigration laws. Republican Senator Jeff Mullis came to that committee meeting as an ex officio member to ensure the bill's 5-4 passage. Supporters of the measure are working to combine this bill with elements of SB 40, the Senate's immigration bill, for final passage. In the House today, there was passage of a measure requiring that small kids stay in booster seats until they are 7, down from their 8th birthday as originally proposed in SB 88.
This is a child restraint bill for those children of age 6 and 7. It expands it from 5 to age 6 and 7 for those children that are smaller in physical stature.
SB 88 passed 128 to 32. Changes made in the House committee send the measure back to the Senate. The Senate, meanwhile, approved a prohibition on the drugs known as bath salts. Action on HB 199 was suspended yesterday, but Senator Ed Harbison led its passage today.
Currently sold in stores throughout the state as plant fertilizer, insect repellent, and fake bath salts. Common brand names of the drugs are Ivory Wave, White China, Infinity, Cloud9, White Dove, and Ocean. They can be purchased for about $10 to $15 to $20 each. So it is something that's available to our children that we need to get rid of.
HB 199 passed the Senate by a vote of 50 to 1. However, a Senate amendment sends that measure back to the House. Reporting live from the Capitol, I'm Mwandi Lawson for Primetime Lawmakers.
Thanks very much, Mwandi. Have a good evening.
You too, Scott.
Turning now to our leadership interview segment, I sat down with Attorney General Sam Olens this afternoon and began by asking him about pending legislation that could change Georgia's sunshine laws.
Well, Representative Jay Pell from Camilla is the chief sponsor. He's a great guy. He's a former mayor. So I wanted to use his experience as mayor with my 12 years on the county level to rewrite the sunshine laws, open records, open meetings. We have a substitute bill on the Attorney General website. We've met with all the stakeholders, from the press to the local government officials, and I think we've got a really good bill. Chairman Willard has promised us hearings in August when they come back for the special session on redistricting. With a little luck, we look for it to be passed out of the House the beginning of January of 12, and to have the bill passed in the Senate also this next year.
How will it make government more open and more accessible to the people?
Well, it does many things. Number one, it clarifies existing law so that the layperson actually can understand the law. Number two, it significantly increases the maximum fine from a measly $100 to $1,000. Three, it puts in process the abuses we currently see in our office and says in black and white, you cannot do it. So governments will no longer be able to say, well, there's a gray area in the law. We didn't really understand it. The parts that I'm frankly more concerned about or more interested in are the Open Meetings Act. We've really made some major changes. Anytime more than 2 people get together to discuss an agenda item, it would then be an illegal meeting. So it makes no difference whether there's 5 or 20 people. 2 is the max. You know, too often you go to a public meeting and they go from agenda item to agenda item with no discussion. The public understands the business was not done in the sunshine. So we're really trying to give the public a greater sense of security that what comes to these meetings is being discussed at those meetings.
So even an unofficial meeting, when they get together for breakfast and knock around what's going to be in the agenda tonight, and they sort of come up with a consensus, they hold the vote in public, so they think that makes them legal. But under this, they wouldn't be.
Absolutely, and that's bad government. I mean, the public deserves to see the process. They don't need to wonder what preceded the meeting. And we've really got some significant changes in the open meetings part of the Sunshines Law that will take care of that.
An awful lot of people have been working hard behind the scenes and in front of the scenes to revamp Georgia's laws on child prostitution and human trafficking in particular. Some progress there.
It was great. When I came back from the National Attorneys General program, I told one of my friends, Rich Golick, who heads the Non-Civil Judiciary Committee, that I wanted to strengthen Georgia's laws on sex trafficking. And he told me Representative Ed Lindsay wanted to work on that, and would we please get together? I'd known Representative Lindsay from Buckhead for years, great guy. Our staff and his staff got together, we revised it, we worked it. It only had 1 no vote in the House. Thanks to Senator Unterman's leadership in the Senate, it had 0 no votes in the Senate. and it is now ready for the governor's signature. It significantly enhances the penalties from a maximum of 20 when you're dealing with someone under 18 under duress. It would now be 25 to 50 years or life. It provides training to law enforcement on how to better handle that type of situation. It makes the victim subject to victim funds, victim crime funds, and it frankly clarifies the law to once again make it easier for law enforcement to do their job.
Your office, of course, has to defend Georgia laws.
Yes.
Is there any sense where the line is between what the federal authorities should be and the state authorities should be when it comes to illegal immigration?
Well, look, the laws are national. The question is how those national laws should affect state policy. So, for instance, both of the bills currently in the Georgia legislature take the E-Verify national law and insert it potentially in state law. Candidly, if the president and Congress would do their job, we wouldn't have a need for these bills to be at the Capitol. But they are not doing their job, just as they don't pass a budget. They're not handling other important issues to our country, such as illegal immigration. We have worked behind the scenes with legislators giving them legal advice, but they have the votes and they choose, and then we're sworn to defend the laws that are passed at the Capitol.
Waiting on the next shoe to drop, what that might be in the water war or the water negotiations, looking at it another way. What's the latest there?
We had a great oral argument in the 11th Circuit several weeks ago. Two of the three judges specifically asked the attorney for the Corps of Engineers whether they would be upset with having the case remanded back to the district court with direction for them to do their job, to approve new water manual protocols. The last protocol relating to Lake Lanier was approximately when I was 2 years old. The Corps has been stymied for a long time from doing their job. The oral argument went great, and we look forward to the 11th Circuit's decision.
And finally, dealing with health care reform on a state level, the health care compact, where does that fall?
Well, clearly we're part of the 26 states that were in Florida with the National Federation of Independent Businesses. The last brief will be due the end of May. It will once again be argued in the 11th Circuit. That case will clearly make its way to the U.S. Supreme Court, and we need that direction. We have inconsistent court cases to date. The public, the business community, everyone needs to know whether or not PPACA, the Patient Affordability Act, is constitutional or unconstitutional. We stridently believe it's unconstitutional, that it violates the 10th Amendment, the Commerce Clause, and we're an active partner in those discussions and look forward to that argument.
Mr. Attorney General, it's great to visit with you. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Scott. My pleasure.
After the short break, I'll be joined by Representative Al Williams and by Department of Natural Resources Deputy Commissioner Todd Holbrook to talk about hunting in Georgia and deer baiting legislation. Stay with us.
Visionary Lester Brown.
We're looking at a race between tipping points, between natural tipping points and political tipping points.
It is clear that Plan A, business as usual, is no longer a viable option.
I'm Matt Damon. Please join me on the next episode of Journey to Planet Earth. Plan B, mobilizing to save civilization.
Tonight at 10 on GPB.
I cry mercy to God and to the King. And I beg the people to pray for the King. For he is a good, gentle, gracious, and amiable prince.
Thursday at 9 on GPB.
Welcome back to Primetime Lawmakers. Late on crossover day, one of those bills that's easy to overlook in the rush to move legislation through passed the House. HB 277 aims to make hunting deer and feral hogs with bait legal in the southern part of Georgia. Currently, it's illegal to hunt any wildlife with bait in Georgia. However, placing bait itself is allowed. Hunters just have to remain 200 yards away. The proposed legislation would change that limit to 50 yards. HB 277 passed the Senate Natural Resources and Environment Committee yesterday and is awaiting a full vote in the Senate. The issue is very important to some hunters, but some opponents have raised concerns over sportsmanship and the spread of animal disease. The bill itself is bipartisan. Representative Jason Shaw, Republican from Lakeland, is the sponsor, and tonight HB 277 co-sponsor Representative Al Williams. A Democrat from Midway is joining us as well to speak out and speak on the bill and to speak on the science behind the arguments and state regulations. We're very pleased to welcome Department of Natural Resources Deputy Commissioner Todd Holbrook. It's great to have you both here this evening. And this kind of discussion always gets a lot of people, especially around the camp stove, wound up. Representative Williams, this is your bill. Why is this change in the hunting law needed?
Well, primarily, this is one of the few bills that I've seen in the last few years that just average Joe gets to get for him. Most of the bills up here are not started by people who are just everyday folk. This is the guy who wants to enjoy hunting deer, who's done it for many, many years. This is just the guy who wants to take his son out or his daughter and enjoy himself. He doesn't have the fancy lobbyists. He only has a few of us who sent up here to speak for them.
And the bottom line, really, when you get right down to it, is this distance, right? The distance you have to keep from bait, reducing it from 200 yards to 50 yards. Why that reduction? How would that help?
Well, we've always hunted over bait for the last 15 years here in Georgia. We've just decided to move the blind. We fed everything we kill. And I told several people, my goodness, we fed pokey and made pork chops. We fed Daisy and made porterhouse. It's time to feed Bambi.
And the difference between supplemental feeding and baiting comes into play, right? Because you can supplemental feed all you want. You just can't hunt over it, right?
That's right. And so what we've done now is made it legal. We're trying to make it legal to feed and be able to hunt over it. You can't, we're at 200 yards now, there has to be a blind. And you cannot shoot a deer over this bait. This gives a hunter the opportunity to really be more discriminatory about which deer he's going to shoot. And it also gives young people the opportunity to be assured of a kill sometimes.
And finally, before I get to Commissioner Holbrook and a couple other items here, why the southern zone in Georgia and not both zones?
This was strictly a public poll, who wanted it and who didn't, and the southern zone favored it by wide margins, as a matter of fact, by about 72%. In my district, about 92%. And we just wanted what the people wanted.
Commissioner Holbrook, it's great to have you with us this evening. And while you're not here to comment specifically on the bill, some of the things about state regulations, the way feeding works, and especially the ecosystem that involves deer, are there any wildlife health concerns with deer feeding?
Well, a lot of the concerns that have been expressed by those people who have come to the hearings has been really around the issue of wildlife diseases. The idea is really, the concept's fairly simple, and that any time that the chance for disease to be spread goes up when there's close contact between individuals within a species. It's just like you and I are likely to share a cold if we're in the same room and coughing, whereas if we're out on the trail hiking somewhere, we're not likely to catch one. And the same kind of situation applies, and there's a few deer diseases that are of utmost concern to these people. And
chronic wasting disease is one of the biggies?
Chronic wasting disease is one of those big ones. That is what they call a prion disease, a bad form protein that is actually communicable. It is the closest thing you can think of would be mad cow disease, and it's just mad cow disease for deer.
Have we ever had a case of chronic wasting disease reported in Georgia?
No cases of chronic wasting disease in Georgia. As chronic wasting disease spread around the state, the Wildlife Resources Division has put an awful lot of time and effort into sampling for it, and that's one of the first things you want to do. You want to detect it instantly if you get it, if you can.
A lot of folks are worried about the size of the deer herd because people run into them with their cars, or they get to a certain spot in the population and they starve to death. What will this potentially extra feeding do to the deer population, or will it affect it?
Well, one of the concerns of the opponents of the bill is that there will be an awful lot of extra food on the ground, and deer populations being very responsive to the amount of food that's available to them, is that the deer herd will actually grow, not decrease as a result of baiting being allowed. That in fact, you'll see up to a 4-fold increase in the amount of bait that's placed out there now that it would be legal to hunt over it, and that increase will increase the potential for deer herd growth without increased potential for additional harvest. That's the concern that's been expressed.
And we're pretty steady in the deer population right now, 30 per square mile, is that what I'm hearing?
Well, it varies around the state considerably. Our statewide population is just under 1 million deer. Just back into the late 90s, it would have been closer to 1.3 million deer. So we've had a very successful, for one of the most successful in the Southeast and the nation at controlling your deer herd and bringing it down. And we did that by a very liberal harvest of antlerless deer.
Representative Williams, do you get concerns from some of your constituents about the sportsmanship of hunting over deer? You touched on that just a moment ago. Is that a worry?
Of course, there are some
Hunting over bait,
quarters where there's some concerns. But let me say this first. It's proven by how well we've done. We've got the finest Department of Natural Resources in the country. We know that. We've got a great commissioner in Mark Williams now. That's why in this bill, the department, if they see an increase or disease, they have the right to step in. And that's there. We want to be able to let this department do their job. They do it greatly. As far as the concerns of sportsmanship, you know, it's in the eyes of the beholder. You know, it's when I remember years ago the trout farms, where trout were kicking each other tail to tail to make sure you'd catch one.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't even have to bait the hook. I mean, you don't go out, everybody wants to sit out in gnats and mosquitoes and not kill something.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, the true, if you're talking about sportsmanship, and I've heard the arguments both ways, but believe me, everything's weighed against the deer anyhow. With the weapons we have today, his chances are minimal. We at least get a chance to be distinguished on which deer you're going to shoot now. And we have been doing this for 15 years, and let's just stop fooling ourselves. Some of the stuff that we've got out there that make deer come to spots you want to shoot them is unbelievable. I mean, I think sportsmanship will take care of itself, and it's still in the eyes of the beholder. Some folk will always complain. I think this is a great bill because the people want it in southern Georgia.
Commissioner Holbrook, you could actually plant, what, a corn patch or a soybean patch and hunt over it all day, right?
That is correct, and that's been that way going back, I think, forever. And basically, if you plant the seed in the ground and it sprouts and grows there, you can hunt over it as a very first cut to what is bait versus what is allowable habitat manipulation.
How big an industry is hunting in Georgia? There are economic impacts to consider here.
It's huge. It's huge. And you know, when I look at the amount of equipment that's purchased, the weapons, the guns that are bought, the trucks, the four-wheelers, there are this is the #1 stop, I believe, for deer hunters in the Southeast. We have people from other states coming here because we have a great population, we have a great department that manages it well, and people come here and get great trophies. I've always made some statements about the fact that the best trophy, of course, is during the rutting season when his neck swells. I think that's the worst thing in the world to do, but I'm not a hunter. But I know that the people around me hunt, and it is not only economically good, it's a heritage thing.
Does this, the regulations not put Georgia at a disadvantage with other states?
I don't think that we do. We have a $350 million average annual industry, deer hunting alone, not considering the other hunting that's out there. And we are the #1 state for non-residents to come visit. So if we've been at a disadvantage, it's been a pretty minor one.
So when we get right down to it, supplemental feeding is allowed now,
Yes.
putting a plot out.
Yes.
Growing a patch of corn is fine. The difference is 50 to 200 yards and how far away you can be from the bait.
The supplemental feeding comes in two forms. One would be the food plot. The other would be actually placing the seed out there, you know, corn or alfalfa pellets or whatever for a deer or something to come eat. The difference between supplemental feeding and that second form and baiting is whether or not you're hunting over it.
Scott, let me share this
Final
with
words,
you.
yes, sir.
One of the great moments I had was this year when we were debating the bill. Jimmy Henderson, a county commissioner down in Bryan County, Georgia, right outside of my district, and his son drove 250 miles just to be here and drove back. That's 500 miles round trip. These are not people of wealth. They love the sport of hunting. Why not help them? We're not here as legislators to prevent folk. We're here to give a great quality of life to our hunters and to our citizens. This is a great bill. It accomplishes that.
We'll watch what happens. Thank you both for joining us this
Thank
evening
you.
and bringing us up to speed on all
Pleasure.
that. Coming up tomorrow on Primetime Lawmakers, we'll continue our leadership interview series with Department of Early Care and Learning Commissioner Bobby Cagle, plus in-depth analysis on important legislative issues and the latest Capitol news tomorrow night at 7. If you'd like to see a repeat of this broadcast, Primetime Lawmakers can be seen at 5:30 tomorrow morning. Coming up next, join David, Kat, and Ricky for Georgia Traveler Peach State Panache. Georgia Travelers next here on GPB. And that's our broadcast for this 36th legislative day of the 2011 session. Thanks to our guests for joining us. For Monty Lawson and the whole Primetime Lawmakers team, I'm Scott Slade. See you tomorrow night right here. Have a good night.
This is a GPB original production.